Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown? I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Stephanie. You found the dark oak.
And today I tell you all about the disappearance of Cathy Moulton, one of the oldest active missing person cases in the entire United States.
You've had me on the edge of my seat since last week's teaser.
I'm actually really excited to bring this one to you because I am almost positive it's one that most of our listeners have not heard about, because there's really not a lot of information on it. And honestly, the only place you can really get the most up-to-date information is from one book, which I'm going to tell you about as we go along.
Welcome to the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month through the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of earnings from our Patreon and sponsors to a nonprofit organization related to the first episode of the month. To find out how you can be part of the movement, head over to thedarkoak.com or stay around to the end of the episode and we'll give you all the details.
In the late afternoon of September 24th, 1971, 16-year-old Deering High School student Cathy Marie Moulton walked north on Forest Avenue on her way home after running errands. That night was a club dance at the TWCA, and Cathy had plans to meet up with friends, but first she needed to pop by the store and get some pantyhose, some toothpaste, and some thread because she had made herself a pant skirt to wear to the dance and she needed to finish hemming it. And for those of you who are really visual like me, are you going to ask what's a pant skirt?
I was going to say, are these like, you don't think of like MC Hammer pants?
No, but I see where you're going with that. So from what I Googled, it's what I used to call culottes.
Okay, sure.
So for those of you who don't know what that is, it's kind of like really loose, flowy pants that kind of read as a skirt maybe, but they're like pants or shorts, something, they are pants, but they look more skirt-like.
What was the year of the story?
1971.
Okay, yep, got it. Check.
Yes. So Cathy visited a store on Congress Street in downtown Portland, Maine, and then she stopped at Starbird Music on Forest Avenue to visit her friend Carol Starbird. After leaving the music store, she continued walking north on Forest Avenue. She'd originally planned to take the bus home, but instead used her bus fare to make purchases.
I like her.
I know. I was like, okay, girl after my own heart.
I like it.
So she decided she would just walk home, which, hey, I will walk home if it means I get to shop just a little bit more.
Maybe you could shop on the way home.
You know I can. You know I can. So she decided she was just going to walk. It was a short distance. So she was just going to walk home. And then when she got home, she would need to take a shower and start getting ready for the dance that evening.
Yeah, at the hop.
That's right. But Cathy never came home. And by 7 p.m., her parents, Roy and Claire, were obviously sick with worry. So they did what any parent would do in this position. They started looking for their daughter. They started out by calling the 3 local hospitals to see if Cathy had possibly been admitted, but she had not been. Mr. Moulton then drove around the town looking for Cathy, and he stopped at this dance because he knew his daughter had planned on attending. And while he was there, he spoke with Carol Starbird, and she confirmed that she'd seen Cathy around 4 p.m. that afternoon, that Cathy had stopped by the music store, and that they'd made plans to meet at the dance. But then when Cathy never showed up, she just assumed that Cathy changed her plans. Now, this is obviously not what Roy wants to hear about his daughter.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an abrupt change of direction. Here you're painting this beautiful picture of this young girl getting ready for this party, and now she's gone.
Yeah.
An abrupt turn.
Abrupt turn. As so often happens in these stories, quite frankly.
Do not like it.
No. So it was a little after 8 p.m. at this point, and Roy decided he was going to go into the Portland Police Department and ask to file a missing persons report for his daughter.
Yeah, absolutely.
The desk sergeant literally laughed at Roy's request.
What?
Yes, girl. Yes. He told Roy that teenagers are prone to running away.
It was the 70s of it all.
It was. And I will say, actually, teenagers did run away a lot in the 70s, but still,
Yeah, but how many... You say that, but how many actually ran away versus how many police reports were not taken? Like, I would love to actually look at
Well,
statistics.
that's true. That's true. But according to this desk sergeant, teenagers were prone to running away, and the department was constantly receiving these requests to search for them. But then they would typically come home within a day or so. So apparently, allegedly, the department had this policy that someone had to be missing for 48 hours before a
48.
missing person report would be done.
48, not even 24.
No, 48.
And I'm sorry, how many hours had she been missing at this point?
She ran into Carol at the store around 4, and it's now like 8 o'clock. So she probably should have been home by she probably should have been home. I'm guessing there was no set time written, but she was on her way home, so I'm guessing maybe 5.
Okay, I don't excuse the laughing because that's just cruel. However, a teenager, 4 hours to, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe it is a little quick, but I understand her father's concern.
Oh yeah, if my child doesn't come home and is 4 hours late with no explanation, I'm doing something.
Yeah, I can't say I would have done anything different.
Right.
But I do understand. Again, the laughing, that's just cruel. But I do understand maybe not taking a report. Well, I don't know. I feel like a report should always at least be taken, but 48 hours is a bit extreme. Let's at least agree to that.
We'll agree to that. And then again, it was the 70s. Teenagers were a little more prone to, hitchhiking, running away, things like that. And it probably is true that the police department probably did receive a lot of requests to look for these kids who would then show up.
Sure.
I mean, I think that's even true now.
Sure.
Most missing people, I think, are found.
Sure.
Which is great.
Yeah.
That's what we want. But still. But either way, this father is being told, give it 48 hours. So after what had to have been the most awful of sleepless nights, Roy drove back to the police department first thing the following morning. Now, this time he was met with a different desk sergeant, but the response was the same. And Roy, I think like you and me, was not going to have any of this. So
right. I'm sorry. Pick a different answer.
Yep. And so he threatened to report the department to the governor's office and to the Maine State Police. And this, conversation that I can only assume got maybe a little heated and maybe a little loud. It actually got the attention of Chief of Police Douglas Steele, who then invited Roy into his office.
Why don't you come behind this closed door so we can discuss this?
Exactly. Now, this meeting with the chief of police did actually do some good, finally, because it resulted in Cathy's photo being distributed to state troopers across the state, and her vital statistics and other pertinent information was transmitted via teletype to the FBI's National Crime Information Center, or the NCIC, for inclusion in the nationwide database.
Good for Roy. Just push it no, you will do something right now.
That's right. Always, always, always be an advocate for yourself, for your loved ones. Just be an advocate because quite frankly, there's no guarantee that anybody else will be.
Absolutely.
Now, unfortunately, despite this move in the right direction, nothing much came from having Cathy's information put out there, and the Moulton family didn't receive any immediate answers. Then, on October 20th, 1971, so almost exactly 1 month after Cathy went missing, Roy Moulton's neighbor, Cliff Pike, told Roy that a fellow neighbor named Sarah Anderson had seen Cathy the week before at the Bangor Mall in Bangor, Maine.
Oh.
Now, of course, this prompted Roy and Claire to drive to Bangor because...
Of course.
Right. What else? First of all, what else are you going to do? It's been a month.
Right.
It's the only lead they have. But there they found no sign of Cathy.
Well, yeah, I don't know that she'd still be hanging out at the mall, but you got to go.
What else can you do?
You got to go.
So after they left this area in Maine, they continued on to Presque Isle, Maine. And there they contacted the local police department to discuss Cathy's case. But when they met with the officers, they learned that no one there had ever heard Cathy's name.
What?
That is when Roy learned that the state police and the local police and the sheriff's departments did not communicate with each other.
Can we just say it again? The 70s of it all?
The 70s of it all. But, I feel like this has been a problem even in more recent cases.
No, it's true. It's gotten better.
It's gotten better. And this is at least all in the same state.
Yeah.
But still, after more than a month, the only law enforcement agencies that were aware that Cathy was even missing was the Portland Police Department, where she lived, and then the FBI.
Wow.
So there was a lot of ground that could have kind of been covered, a lot of eyes that could have been looking out for her that didn't even know, quite frankly, she existed.
Right.
Now, Roy's shock and disappointment fortunately did prompt the local authorities to band together a little more than they had previously, and they were able to find a witness who had reported seeing Cathy trying to purchase beer a few weeks prior. But that was the only lead, and ultimately the Moultons had no choice but to return home to Portland without their daughter.
Oh.
And Stephanie, that's it. That's the story of the disappearance of Cathy Moulton. Or at least it was the story of the disappearance of Cathy Moulton for the next 24 years.
Wow. Okay. So we're talking some cold case territory.
Cold case. I told you the top of this episode.
In the freezer cold.
Yep. Top of the episode. This is Maine's oldest active missing persons case.
Yeah.
And one of the United States' oldest active missing person cases.
Wow. Okay.
So in 1995, Portland Police Detective Sergeant Thomas P. Joyce Jr., who was the supervisor of detectives, threw a thin file onto the desk of Detective Kevin J. Cady, an 11-year veteran of the Portland Police Force. Detective Sergeant Joyce told Detective Cady that he wanted to clear up some of the older, unsolved homicide cases, missing person cases, and major crime cases. The cold case to which Cady had been assigned, Portland Police Department Case 71-60141, the case of missing Cathy Moulton. Now, the file included a one-page typewritten missing person report filed on September 25th, 1971, and an investigative supplement dated January 15th, 1988, which was the last date the investigative work had been logged on the case.
Okay. I'm surprised there was anything that, 16 years. Am I doing math right? 17 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
After she originally went missing.
Right. There was, I believe it was 4 pages total.
But it sounds like it's literally just administrative work. There's no actual, real detective work.
Yeah, it's just the initial report. Yeah. And one supplement. 4 pages.
Wow.
And that's what we got.
Wow.
So Cady asked Joyce, hey, where's the rest of the file?
Yeah, no kidding.
Joyce's response was, quote, that's it. Now it's up to us. Detectives investigate. So investigate, detective. End quote.
Okay.
See, I thought that was powerful. I love that. I love that. And I wanted to kind of stop and appreciate it for a moment because I feel like it's so applicable in life.
Yeah.
Here we are. Here's the situation we're in.
Yeah.
Through no fault of our own. Here's the cards we've been dealt. Here's what we have. We're not going to complain about it. We're not going to make excuses. We're going to get out there. We're going to investigate. It's up to us.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that really spoke to me. I was just like, stop making excuses, detective. Get out there and investigate.
Yeah.
I loved that. I loved that.
Yeah.
So I'm a fan of Joyce right off the bat. And I'm going to tell you right now that Detective Sergeant Joyce and Detective Cady spent the next several decades working on Cathy's case.
Good for them.
Detective Cady ultimately became the lead investigator, and I would say expert, on this case. And everything I'm going to tell you from here on out is coming directly from him because he wrote that book I mentioned.
Right. Okay.
A book titled Cathy Moulton, Missing and Endangered.
Okay.
The book was released in 2016, and in it, Cady covers, in chronological order, his entire investigation, which again spans several decades. So as I tell you the rest of this story, I just want you to keep this in mind. I'm literally going to be walking you through the investigation, but remember, the investigation didn't really start until 25 years after the event. So we're going to be talking about interviews that happened in the mid-90s about events that happened in the early 70s.
Okay.
Keep that in mind because Even in my research, at times it did get a little confusing.
So we're going to be jumping forward, jumping back, jumping forward.
We're going to be all over the place.
Okay.
So after receiving this file, the first thing Detective Cady wanted to do was go back and speak to Cathy's best friend, Nancy Barlow. And despite the fact that she was Cathy's very, very best friend, the first time Nancy was ever spoken to about Cathy was in 1995, 25 years after she went missing.
Wow.
So
that seems shocking.
There was literally no investigation done. Cathy went missing. It
sounds like it.
They took the report. They said she was a runaway. We're closing our file. That was pretty much what happened.
Shocking.
Now, speaking to Nancy was very fruitful. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Talking to the best friend.
Imagine investigation actually finding information.
Oh, and you will see what's credible and why I'm really drawn to this case is because even 25 years later, and I can't say a little investigation because these men really poured their lives into it, but there was a lot to be found out. Investigators spoke to Nancy, and she was able to give insight into Cathy's behavior in the months before she went missing. Investigators learned through Nancy that though Cathy had a reputation of being an obedient teenager who followed the rules and made good choices, she, like many 16-year-olds, did have a little bit more of a rebellious side to her that maybe had not been previously reported. Maybe her parents weren't even aware of it. Imagine that.
I can see how you really like Cathy.
Oh, I do like Cathy.
Yeah.
I do like Cathy. Well, and because she wasn't doing anything really awful. I'll tell you about it. But she's 16, you know, she's caught between a girl and a woman and she thinks she's grown and she's not really. And we've all kind of been there. So for starters, some of the things she was doing that maybe her parents weren't aware of, she'd taken up smoking cigarettes. But far more concerning than that, Detective Cady learned that Cathy was a bit of a real risk taker. For example, Nancy and Cathy liked to hang out at a local coffee shop where a more alternative, artsy crowd hung out. You know, an older crowd, grown-ups hung out. And while they were there one afternoon, the girls met a man named Chris Church, who told the girls that he was a photographer. And he said he wanted to take photos of Cathy in his downtown studio apartment.
Danger, danger, danger.
Okay. So you and I obviously, we literally almost hear the alarm bells.
In our adult brains, we're saying, this is not okay.
This is not good. A little girl, not a little girl, but a young girl in an adult man's apartment.
A naive girl. Nope.
Taking photos. I mean,
it's like Stranger Danger 101.
I honestly actually think I feel like when I was 16 being warned. Now, if any man ever approaches you in the mall and says, "Can I take your photo?" Run.
Yeah, it's probably because of cases like this.
Yes. But according to Nancy, Cathy did go to Chris's apartment and was photographed just a few months before she went missing.
Ooh, I don't know why I'm cringing. It could have been totally fine, but it just doesn't. I don't like it.
Well, get this. Detective Cady tracked down Chris Church.
All right, Chris Church, please be kind of normal.
Chris Church was interviewed in 1995. And at this point, Chris Church is in his mid-40s. You know, time's gone by. Detective Cady described him as appearing nervous. So nervous, in fact, that Detective Sergeant Joyce believed he was hiding something.
Oh, man. I hate when my intuition is right.
Well, hold on. Let's see. Let's see what happens. In an effort to force information out of him, Detective Joyce practiced a tactic called crowding, which is exactly what it sounds like. They just get in your space, get too close to the interviewee in an effort to intimidate, make the person feel uncomfortable. So maybe they'll just reveal information that they wouldn't otherwise reveal.
I refer to that as homeschooling.
Now that sounds like a torture device.
Which is what I do every day to my children. They just love it. They just love it.
I literally just asked her kids, "Hey, how's school?" Because school just started back this week. We hate it. We hate it.
It's been a rough first week. It's been a rough first
week. What
week.
kid doesn't hate the first week of school? I mean, what mom doesn't hate the first week of school, quite frankly?
I literally explained to the kids what the idea of re-entry is. And I said, this is normal. This is normal that mama's getting frustrated. You're getting frustrated. Tensions are pretty high. We're going to survive it. I was basically a pep talk to myself was what it was. And then I continued with crowding.
What's funny is Stephanie and I have not had this conversation. I literally had the same almost conversation with my son who just went back to traditional school, and it was this is normal. It's your first week back. I know it feels really long. You're going to get used to it. It's going to be fun. So, same.
Fingers crossed for every parent and child out there this week. Fingers crossed.
That's right. Well, I hope the crowding tactic pays off for you, Stephanie, as much as it did for Detective Joyce, because Chris ended up admitting that he had, in fact, taken photos of Cathy back in 1971. He said that Cathy had remained fully clothed during this photo shoot, but he did admit that he tried to kiss her while she was there in his apartment. During the interview, Chris Church agreed to search his archives for the negatives of this photo shoot. And honestly, somewhat surprisingly to me, he actually delivered, literally, a stack of photographs of Cathy. And in the photos, she was innocently posed, maybe slightly flirty, but nothing inappropriate for a 16-year-old girl. And she was fully clothed.
Okay. I'm worried about the pictures he didn't show them, but, I'm happy he was able to find these.
I had the same exact thought.
I was oh, well, okay, he's clearly innocent.
Can you tell that we do true crime for a living?
Well, cross him off the list.
That's right. Well, as far as Detective Joyce and Detective Cady know, as far as they've noted, they did, in fact, cross Chris off the list. So, fingers crossed, all of the photos were delivered.
All right. Well, they actually got to talk to him face to face, and maybe their intuition is better than ours in this situation. But I don't know. I still got my eyes on him.
Keep him on. Keep him on, Chris. We're still watching you, Chris.
It's exactly right.
Nancy had also told detectives that Cathy had a secret older boyfriend.
Oh, she was a bit of a risk taker.
She was a bit of a risk taker. Now, this boyfriend's name was Lester Everett, and he was, at the time that Cathy disappeared, 22 years old. Remember, Cathy's 16. So, an age difference that is inappropriate.
Yeah.
And Nancy confirmed that Cathy had been sleeping with him when she went missing. So, even more icky.
Yeah, cringy.
So now, obviously, the search for Lester Everett is going to begin. It didn't take long for the search to reveal that Lester Everett was a suspect in a 1971 vehicle theft in Falmouth, Maine. A Mrs. Davis, who owned a motel on U.S. Route 1, had lent her blue 1963 four-door Cadillac sedan to Lester, but he never returned it, so she reported it stolen. Now, this search on Lester also revealed that Lester's brother, Mark, was the subject of a death investigation in the late 1970s. The death was his own. Mark had been at a bar in Portland when he suddenly walked out into the street, put a gun to his head, and killed himself.
Oh my gosh.
I share this with you just to let you know there is something in this history, in this family. There's some trauma. There's there's some heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, Lester Everett was never going to be interviewed regarding Cathy, as he'd passed away almost a decade prior to detectives linking him to Cathy.
Okay.
They were able to confirm that one of his prior addresses was in Fernandina Beach, Florida, which would become an important location later in the investigation. In 1996, the deputy marshals joined Cathy's case, which was very encouraging because deputy marshals are the premier law enforcement agency in the United States with experience in locating fugitives. So, someone who doesn't want to be found. So, if you're looking for someone, they're really good to have on your team.
Yeah, and also just to have more kind of boots on the ground, because now the search area for her is greatly expanding. So, of course, she disappeared from Portland, Maine, and now you're including possibly a Florida address that, the scope is getting a lot larger.
Yes, and you will see that the more, as you said, boots on the ground, in this case especially, the more successful we're going to be. Now, at this point, the investigation led to a man named Don Logan, who was interviewed in 1997. So you see where we're going here. We reopened the case in 1995. We're already 2 years in, and we're talking to a man named Don Logan. So this was literally a lifetime of work, this case.
Yeah.
So back in 1971, Don worked at Dorsey's Garage in Fort Fairfield, Maine. And he remembered seeing, and this is a quote literally from the book, so not my words, a quote from the book, a young Indian male, and we will later learn he sees a Native American male escorting a teenage female, presumably Cathy, to the bathroom at the service station where he worked.
Oh, okay.
Now, this stood out to him because of the way the boy was acting towards the girl, literally holding her closely to him and keeping one hand on the back of her neck. Logan said there was also a young white male driving the Cadillac that the three were traveling in. At the time, Logan wondered if perhaps the girl had been abducted, given the proximity to the border with New Brunswick, which is in Canada.
Yeah, so you're talking about crossing borders here.
Right. When interviewed in 1997, Logan positively identified photographs of Lester Everett and Cathy Moulton as two of the three people he saw.
Wow, okay. And
another eyewitness led investigators to interview a man named Tony Bear Solis, who by the time he was interviewed in 1996 was in his early 40s. In 1971, Bear lived on the Tobique Maliseet First Nation Reservation in Tobique Point, New Brunswick, and he recognized Lester Everett because Lester used to spend time on the reservation. When shown a photo of Cathy, Bear said he recognized her, but he knew her under the name Candy. And so what I'm not sure is, I don't know if Cathy introduced herself as Candy or if maybe he's just misremembering.
Yeah.
Because he's actually not the only witness who remembers Cathy as Candy.
Okay, got it.
But either way, they confirmed it is Cathy that he knew. And he said that she'd ran away from home and was staying on the reservation with Rita and Maurice Purley, and said that she was their son Reed Purley's girlfriend.
Okay.
And then Bear then revealed that Lester had left Cathy and something bad happened to her, but he would reveal nothing else.
Oh, well, that's ominous.
Very. So that brings us to this alleged boyfriend, Ronald Reed Purley. In 1996, Reed Purley was awaiting trial for a sexual assault with charges including home invasion and rape by force. Reed Purley had a very long history of arrest. To put it simply, he was a very bad guy.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Just to help paint you a picture, the Purley boys, as they were known on the reservation, it's Reed and his brothers and maybe some cousins, it's a whole group of these Purley boys.
Yes.
They were involved in a shootout just a couple months before this investigation, just completely unrelated. So these are the kinds of crowds Reed Purley is associated with.
Okay.
Now, when interviewed, Reed recognized Lester, and he was able to say his name. But when he looked at a picture of Cathy, he said he didn't know her. However, later, during this same interview, he would mockingly ask, "You mean she never made it home? Her parents haven't seen her since then?" That's a pretty strange thing to say about a girl that you didn't know, and therefore you didn't know was missing.
Yeah, gross.
After interviewing Purley, Detectives Joyce and Cady believed him to either be responsible for Cathy's disappearance or as having direct knowledge of what happened to Cathy.
Right.
The potential that he could do something so awful as to make a 16-year-old girl disappear seemed like a real possibility given his considerable criminal history. He had multiple arrests, many on violent charges, and he'd even been questioned about a previous murder in Massachusetts. So in 1976, Detective Dwyer of the Massachusetts Police Department had been assigned to a reported stabbing, and the victim, Judy Campbell, was found on the sidewalk outside of a bar with her throat cut. Now, when Detective Dwyer got there, she was still conscious and breathing, but unable to speak, and therefore unable to name her attacker. And unfortunately, despite Dwyer attempting first aid, Judy Campbell did not survive the attack. It was later learned that Reed Purley was a patron in the same bar as Judy and had tried to strike up a conversation with her, but when Judy rejected his advances and left the bar, several witnesses saw Reed follow her out of the bar, and within moments, her throat had been cut.
Oh, could they actually, link him, though? Or it's
Nope.
just all circumstantial?
Yep.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah. Now, perhaps coincidence, more than likely not, Judy Campbell was a complete doppelganger to Cathy Moulton.
Get out.
Literally, okay, so the book was like they could be identical twins. And I was like, well, that's probably a stretch. I Googled it. They could be identical twins.
What a twist.
Isn't that interesting?
Ooh.
So it's possible that Reed Purley has a type.
Yeah.
If he's involved in the murder and or Cathy's disappearance. Like, we don't know for sure, but
Well, you're painting me a picture, though, Cynthia. It's certainly a compelling lead.
sure, yeah. Another eyewitness in Cathy's case, named Millie Augustine from Big Cove, New Brunswick, spoke to Detective Sergeant Joyce by telephone. Millie admitted to being familiar with Lester Everett and said she'd met Cathy while working on a potato field with her. And this was confirmed when she viewed photographs of Lester and Cathy. So she confirmed those were the Lester and Cathy she knew. But even better than that, Millie was able to provide her own photographs that she'd taken in Fernandina Beach, Florida. And these photos were herself and her sister Donna, a man named Emmett Peters, and Lester Everett, who she knew as David Everett.
Oh, that's weird.
Neither Cathy Moulton nor Reed Purley were in any of these photographs, though Millie did know both of them. Get this, at the time of her interview, Millie was unaware that Cathy had gone missing more than 25 years earlier.
Well, I mean, I certainly get that. I mean, it's someone you were an acquaintance with. They were a friend of a friend. I mean, you just think they're going about their lives, right? Think about all the chance encounters you've had with people in, groups of friends.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what actually is sticking out in my mind is how frustrating it is that Cathy, if we put all this together, Cathy was alive for quite a bit of time after her disappearance. And if the police department at the time had put in any amount of work, she may have been found.
It is appearing at this point that Cathy was alive for some time. I mean, we have all these sightings. We have these people that said, yeah, I knew her when, and I knew her on this potato farm, and I saw her here. So you're right. Maybe if those local police had been aware that she was missing, they may have seen her, and we wouldn't be talking about this right now.
Right.
So one of the boys in Millie's photos, Emmett Peters, who I mentioned, was interviewed in 1996 by Constable Joe Michael from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So now they're involved.
Okay, got it.
Emmett remembered working at McBride's farm in Mars Hill, Maine, during the potato harvest of 1971. So that's the year Cathy went missing.
And he's confirming Millie's story.
He's confirming Millie's story.
Okay.
That he worked there at this potato farm with Lester Everett and a girl named Cathy who was from Portland. But then he said he had no idea what happened to Cathy after she left McBride's one night with Lester and didn't return the next day. So they're working at this potato farm. And then one night, Lester takes Cathy in his car, comes back without her. The next day, Lester shows up to work at this potato picking farm, and Cathy's not there, and he has no idea what happens next.
Oh, that doesn't sound great.
Then Emmett said that he and Millie's sister and Lester all traveled down to Fernandina Beach, Florida in late 1971 in a Cadillac driven by Lester. In October of 1996, Maine's Assistant Attorney General William Schneider agreed to convene an investigatory grand jury in Cumberland County Superior Court looking into Cathy's disappearance, because now we at the very least have witness statements that are telling us something happened. We still don't really know what, but there's something.
And there's enough people that have confirmed that they saw her. All their stories are lining up.
Right. Nobody's story is discounting anybody else's.
Exactly.
And many of the witnesses I've told you about thus far were subpoenaed to testify at this grand jury. But as we know, grand jury meetings are secret.
Right.
So we don't know the details of what came out, but we know the result was that not enough new information was obtained.
Really?
Yep.
Okay. Seems like it would have been pretty compelling, but what do I know?
Not the kind of people to give up, Detectives Joyce and Cady kept plugging along. And in 1997, Detective Cady learned that there was a long-standing rumor that one of the Purley sisters was murdered on the reservation in 1971.
Oh, that's horrible.
She was said to have been buried in the dirt floor basement of a man named Ivan Purley's home. Now, Ivan Purley was the uncle of Reed Purley. Reed Purley was allegedly Cathy's boyfriend.
Right.
And Ivan Purley was known around the reservation as Ivan the Rapist.
Oh, Ivan the Rapist. That's not really a moniker following you around.
It's not.
And also, don't be a rapist.
Let's not.
Can we just start with that?
I think that's a good motto to live by, a good rule. A good rule of thumb, I say.
Oh, gosh.
Now, here's something strange about this rumor. First of all, none of the Purley sisters were deceased.
Oh.
On top of that, Ivan's home had burnt down in the late 1970s and then had been rebuilt. And Reed Purley's sister, Leisha, now lived there. But this kind of got investigators wondering, what if instead of one of the Purley sisters having been murdered and then buried under Ivan's home the very year that Cathy disappeared, what if Cathy had been killed and buried there?
Sure. I can see how that would make sense.
Well, unfortunately, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police declined to search the property.
It is pretty circumstantial. I can see how they would think that, though.
Yeah. So Kevin Cady contacted FBI Special Agent Steve Kives, assigned to a specialized unit dealing with child abduction and serial killers in the FBI. This unit is also known as CASCU. And after receiving the case synopsis, Agent Kives was able to offer his analysis based upon the evidence presented. And his analysis revealed that Reed Purley was the most likely culprit.
I don't know. I got my eye on Lester, too.
Once again, Kevin Cady wanted to talk to Purley. So Cady pulled all the strings and did everything he could do to be able to offer Reed something that, would make him want to talk. And he was able to offer Reed limited immunity if he provided information about Cathy. But Purley's response was, quote, "I told them I wasn't going to talk about her again, and I won't. Ever." End quote.
Okay, so I would probably consider that uncooperative.
Well, and again, especially since the first time he said he didn't even know her. Like, if you don't know her, why don't you want to talk about her? Like, there's a difference between I have nothing to say, I can't talk about her, I didn't know her, and I said I was never going to talk about her, and I'm not going to.
Yeah, I mean, don't lose the sight of the fact that this guy was basically like, had been a criminal his entire life.
Oh, he's a bad guy.
So I think navigating around the judicial prosecution system is something he's no stranger to.
Right.
So I'm sure he had just realized, keep your mouth shut. Nothing's good is going to come of talking about it, at least in his circles.
Sure, I'm sure. Yeah, that makes total sense.
So now basically we're either narrowing down on Reed, Purley, or Lester Everett.
Yeah, I would say based upon the evidence that we have at this point, yeah, either Reed Purley or Lester Everett or both look like they could be very likely responsible for Cathy's disappearance. Absolutely. Now, the outcome of Reed Purley not wanting to talk to the investigators was obviously disappointing. But Detectives Joyce and Cady were not going to let this discourage them once again. The evidence just kept pointing them back to the Canadian Tobique Point Reservation, and they felt in their guts that whatever happened to Cathy happened on that reservation. Now, unfortunately, investigating crimes on the sovereign land of the reservation was not an easy thing to do. Violence can be commonplace, and time again, Detectives Joyce and Cady learned that witnesses will often keep what they know to themselves, even many years after the fact, because of the very, very real fear of retribution.
Sure.
But despite knowing that it might just be a lost cause in 1997, Cady and Joyce entered the reservation with the plan to ask as many people as possible about Cathy. They brought flyers with her picture and offered a $5,000 reward, which was funded by Roy and Claire Moulton. And they were going to offer this reward to anyone who provided information that resulted in the recovery of Cathy's remains. While on the reservation, they interviewed Reed Purley's sister, Jacqueline, who said that the last time she saw Cathy was on Thanksgiving Day, November 24th, 1971. And that was when she saw Cathy running naked in the middle of a heavy snowstorm. She said Cathy was running away from her Uncle Ivan's house.
Oh, this is horrible.
You remember Ivan the rapist?
Yes. How could I forget?
Yes. Now, Jacqueline said that she was positive that something bad happened to Cathy that night.
Yeah, I'd say that's that's not a stretch.
Jacqueline seemed very sincere and helpful until her sister Leisha Purley came in during the middle of Jacqueline's interview and yelled at her to stop talking to the cops. And it was then that Jacqueline shut down. Cady wanted to confirm or rule out as much of Jacqueline's story as he could. So he looked up the weather on Thanksgiving Day, 1971, and there was, in fact, a major snowstorm. In fact, it was the greatest November snowfall on record and the 7th worst blizzard since 1888.
Oh, no.
So again, all these little pieces
Sure.
are adding up. And before leaving the reservation, Joyce and Cady hung their flyers, but within a few hours received a call advising them that Leisha Purley had taken them all down and destroyed them. Then Detective Cady was told by a fellow investigator that there was a local psychic, Gladys Rogers, who'd proven helpful to police in previous cases, and at this point, what did he have to lose? Detective Sergeant Joyce was less thrilled with the idea of consulting a psychic. He was definitely a man of science, but he went along with it, saying, hey, pretty much, if it solves the case, I'll do anything, right?
Sure.
Gladys Rogers was about 70 years old, living with her husband in Springfield, Massachusetts, when Detective Cady showed her a photo of Cathy. Now, Gladys immediately said that Cathy was deceased. She took a map of the United States and divided it in half at the Mississippi River, and she said that Cathy was buried in a sand pit and scrub pines in Portland, Maine. She said her body was buried near the intersection of Forest Avenue, which is where she had been walking when she disappeared, and Riverside Street in Portland. Now, Gladys did know that Kevin Cady was from Portland, so it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that she would have just naturally placed Cathy there.
Okay.
But she shouldn't have known about these other places in Portland. And it was pretty compelling because Cady was aware that there was a sand pit with scrub pines very close to the intersection that Gladys described.
Okay.
So Gladys agreed to travel to Portland in an effort to get more focused information. And a few weeks later, she did meet with authorities in Portland. She asked to be put in a car and driven around the city. Detective Joyce drove her around aimlessly for about 30 minutes before turning onto Clinton Street from Forest Avenue, and he never mentioned that this was the street that Cathy lived on. When they drove past her house, Gladys pointed and said, "That's her house."
Oh, interesting.
Then Gladys exclaimed, "Oh my God, she was killed in there by her father."
Oh, wow. Okay. So that was not exactly where I thought that was going to go.
Took a turn, didn't it?
Yeah.
Gladys then directed the authorities to the intersection of Forest Avenue and Riverside and located a sand pit owned by the J.B. Brown Company. The group trespassed on the property, and Gladys settled on a spot where she declared that Cathy had been buried. Immediately, one of the officers began digging, but was stopped by Detective Joyce because they didn't have permission to be on the property. They definitely didn't have permission to be digging up the property.
Well, and you want to make sure you're following all the rules on this if it does wind up to be a homicide.
Absolutely. Now, ultimately, for reasons I don't know, the sand pit was never searched, and 3 years later, the pit was sold, excavated, and a supermarket now stands on the spot.
So it stands to reason if she was there, they probably would have found her, but we're not sure.
I would have assumed they'd find her. I guess it's not 100%, sure that they would have, but you would think that they might. For the record, Roy Moulton has never been considered a person of interest in his daughter's disappearance.
Okay.
But it's always interesting to me because it's like she knew the house. She knew there was a sand pit here. It's so interesting.
Maybe if we really looked at it closer, we could figure out how she might have known some of these details, but it is compelling.
It's compelling. And that was 1997, so it's not like, it wasn't like we had the internet handy at our fingertips like we do now.
Sure.
Now, speaking of that was 1997. We're going to fast forward to June of 2004.
Okay. Quite
So,
the leap.
Quite the leap. And again, reminding you, this was a slow burn case. In June of 2004, Detective Sergeant Joyce and Detective Cady spoke to Warden Sergeant Patrick Dorian from Greenville, Maine. They gave him a synopsis of Cathy's case, and he immediately remembered a case that he'd worked on that might be helpful. In 1983, a hunter found human skeletal remains, and he believed them to be that of a woman because he said there was women's clothing scattered around the bones. The hunter noticed that close to the remains was a triangular formation of 6 maple syrup barrels next to an old stove. Now, later, when this man tried to retrace his steps with the police, he was unable to do so, and tragically, the skeletal remains were never found again. You see, it was the beginning of hunting season, which is a really busy time for the game wardens.
Yeah.
And then the day after the hunter found the remains, there was a really heavy snowfall.
Oh, man, that's rough.
Really rough. And then no subsequent searches were ever performed. Now, Warden Sergeant Patrick Dorian suggested that Detective Cady locate this hunter and re-interview him and go back and search that area again, at least for the barrels and the stove. However, Dorian advised that since the foliage was still in full bloom, it would probably be best to wait until October. After the leaves had fallen, there would be better visibility.
Yeah, sure.
On October 1st, 2004, Officer Cady became the lead investigator on Cathy's case after Sergeant Joyce retired. And 2 weeks later, on October 15th, a search party loaded up and headed into the woods of Maine. Now, these are deep woods. Maine, deep woods.
Yeah.
And during this search, several of the searchers, including a game warden and her canine, became disoriented.
Oh, boy.
They required assistance even figuring out where they were. So that helped me visualize a little bit more how it was possible that maybe a hunter stumbled across these remains, but then couldn't find them again.
Right. They were just neglectful.
Right. Like we're talking deep woods. Now, this search lasted for about 6 hours, but just like 16 years prior, the barrels and stove were never found.
That is wild to me.
Wild, right? I am fully aware that I have shared with you a whole bunch of snippets that make up this much larger picture, and you have just been doing your very best to follow along, and I appreciate it.
Well, so many different leads and possibilities.
Well, I felt the need to tell the story that way because it's almost like we have 2 different versions of the case. We have the 1971 version where she ran away and disappeared. And then we have a 1995 version where we start to find out maybe, she was seen here, she was seen there, something happened here. And I just kind of felt like I needed to explain how they got there.
Sure.
But now I'm going to put it all together for you.
All right.
So based on all of the police interviews and the years of investigation, we do know this happened to Cathy Moulton. Just moments after leaving Starbird Music on September 24th, 1971, Lester Everett, the man who Cathy had secretly been sleeping with, pulled a blue 4-door 1963 Cadillac off to the side of Forest Avenue and told Cathy he was running a quick errand. He had a male passenger in the front seat who he introduced as Reed, and together they invited Cathy to hop in the car and join them.
Okay, so basically both of these dirt bags are responsible for her disappearance? Yeah, should have figured.
Cathy, having a huge crush on Lester, obliged and got in the car. Now, unfortunately, the quick trip that Lester had told Cathy they were going to take was actually a 4-hour drive to New Brunswick, Canada, where he planned to take Reed, a hitchhiker, home to the Tobique Maliseet First Nation reservation in Tobique Point, New Brunswick.
So they weren't even friends.
No.
This was just a chance meeting between 2 jerks.
Yeah, probably to make some money, just like, or who knows what, smoke some, who knows?
I mean, how did these 2 nefarious dudes wind up together? Incredible.
Yep. Now, it didn't take long for Cathy to regret getting into the car with Lester Everett, and she asked repeatedly for him to take her home. And he promised he would after taking Reed to the reservation. On their way north, the trio stopped at the Bangor Mall to eat, and while there,
Oh, so the eyewitness account was correct there.
a woman named Sarah Anderson, who used to live in Portland, saw Cathy with the two boys. She recognized Cathy because Cathy used to clean her house before she moved to Bangor, Maine.
Oh, got it.
Now, Cathy and Sarah did not speak, but Sarah was sure it was Cathy, and she described the two males who she was with as unsavory.
Well, yes, I agree, and I've never even seen them.
Later, Lester stopped at Dorsey's garage in Fort Fairfield, Maine, and used Mrs. Davis's stolen credit card to purchase gas and 4 new tires for the Cadillac that he also stole from Mrs. Davis.
Oh, good grief.
While at the service station, Cathy was kept close to the two men, including being escorted to the restroom. The trio then crossed the Canadian border at Fort Fairfield via a narrow back road, which allowed them to avoid the border checkpoint.
Oh, that's disappointing.
Eventually, they arrived at the Tobique Maliseet First Nation Reservation. For 2 days, Lester and Cathy stayed on the reservation at the home of Reed's parents. Lester, who told people on the reservation that his name was David, presumably because he was on the run after stealing Mrs. Davis's car.
And also, a girl.
True. David, or Lester, heard that there was seasonal manual labor jobs at McBride's farm in nearby Mars Hill, Maine, and he thought he and Cathy could get jobs picking potatoes, with the goal being to make enough cash to fund the price of gasoline to get back to Portland. A girl named Millie Augustine worked on the potato farm with her sister Donna and their father Joe. Millie was friendly with Cathy and noticed that Cathy seemed to feel safest within the confines of the blue Cadillac. She would even sleep inside the car.
Oh, that's tough.
Millie noted that Cathy seemed to be afraid of the men she met and mistrusted Lester.
Yeah, for good reason.
Cathy confided in Millie that her parents would be worried about her and that she just wanted to go home. Millie's father, Joe, looked out for the young girl and brought a dinner plate to Cathy every night. Now, you may not be surprised to hear, Lester wasn't super popular on the farm.
Really? That good, upstanding citizen?
It's crazy, right? Apparently, he did a lot of day drinking, and he liked to take long naps while everyone else picked potatoes.
Oh, gosh.
And then worse than that, he would get really frustrated with Cathy because she was constantly saying she wanted to go home.
Imagine that.
So on or around September 29th, 1971, Lester Everett took Cathy for a ride. Once again, she asked him to take her back home to Portland, but instead, he drove into Canada on a road that again avoided the Canadian border inspection.
I just hate this. It sounds like she had kind people around her, but I wish somebody had asked more questions. Frustrating.
Lester drove Cathy back to the Maliseet First Nation Reservation at Tobique Point and stopped in front of the house where Reed Purley lived with his parents. About an hour later, Lester left the Purley home without Cathy, a move he would later say he regretted.
He just dumped her there?
He just left her. Back at the potato farm the next morning, Millie asked where Cathy was, and Lester responded that he dropped her off at another camp. He was tired of her complaining. And Lester would remain at the potato camp until it concluded in late October 1971, and according to all of the known witnesses, he never mentioned Cathy's name again. Now,
Unbelievable.
Lester then decided his next move should be to Florida for the orange picking season. And this is the trip that Emmett and the Augustine sisters would join him on. He convinced them that Florida was going to be a way better place to spend the brutal winters than, up north. So the group drove nonstop to Florida and crossed the border into the Sunshine State around October 18th. The very first beach they encountered was Fernandina Beach, and once there, Lester announced that they'd made it to their destination. And surprise, surprise, Lester had lied. There were no jobs, no places to stay lined up in Florida. The group spent the night on the beach until the police showed up and made them leave. And in a great stroke of luck for the group, they ended up befriending an older couple, the Samuels, who offered them a place to stay for a few weeks until they could find jobs and more permanent places to live. They ended up staying with the Samuels for over 4 months. Eventually, Emmett Peters, along with Millie and Donna Augustine, would board a Greyhound bus in Jacksonville and return to their homes. But Lester Everett would stay behind in Florida with the stolen Cadillac.
Oh my gosh.
2 years later, in 1973, Lester Everett decided to drive back to the reservation to confront Reed Purley and find out what happened to Cathy because she never came home.
Like, what did he think was going to happen? Go to confront him? You're the one that just left her.
According to Lester's friend, John Wayne Aceto, who accompanied Lester on this trip back to the reservation, Lester had suspected Cathy of being pregnant when he left her, but in the years since began to feel guilty that she never came home. I don't know, maybe he felt like he was partially responsible for her position. I don't know.
Wild.
According to an interview with John Wayne Acetti, when he and Lester arrived at the Purley home, Ivan, and his nephews came out of the house and immediately became violent with Lester.
Also shocking.
A fight ensued, and Lester lost his leather jacket and cowboy boots in the fight. And as Lester...
Oh, boo-hoo.
Right? As Lester and John Wayne were finally able to escape back to the safety of Lester's vehicle and pull away from the Purley home, one of the Purleys screamed, quote, "If you ever come back, we'll kill you," end quote. On July 15, 2010, Detective Cady retired from police work after 25 years of service. No investigatory activity by the Portland Police Department has been logged on the Moulton case since the search of the Maine woods in 2004. But Kevin Cady refused to give up on Cathy even during his retirement. In fact, he was now a licensed private detective, as was Tom Joyce. Together, they contacted the RCMP Major Case Section in Fredericton, New Brunswick, who was now the main investigative agency for Cathy Moulton.
Okay.
In 2011, even though he's retired, former detective Cady created a Facebook page.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Cathy Moulton, Missing Endangered. Now, unfortunately, it appears this page is no longer active because I did try to go visit. However, upon its creation, the page drew several hundred visitors, and Detective Cady hoped it would bring in new leads. Even Leisha Purley, remember her?
How could I forget?
Right. Even she wanted to take part in this search to help find Cathy.
Oh, I bet she did.
Mm-hmm. And she initiated a chat session with Detective Cady through the page.
I bet that must have been wild for Detective Cady.
Get this. Apparently, Leisha thought she was talking to one of Cathy's grieving relatives. She had no idea she was actually chatting with one of the two officers.
Oh my gosh.
One of the two officers who she told her sister not to speak to years earlier. She told Detective Cady she didn't know much about Cathy, but she did confirm that Cathy stayed with her family in 1971 and that her uncle Ivan lived next door at the time.
Mm-hmm.
She said she was terrified of Ivan when she was a little kid. She wouldn't even walk by his house.
As she should have been.
Right. She said she also believed that a relative of hers hurt Cathy, but she wouldn't give any further information. She stated that she now owned and lived in Ivan Purley's former home, the one that she was afraid to walk by when she was little, and the one that was rumored to have a body buried in the basement.
All kinds of trauma going on right there.
Leisha offered to talk to her brother Reed about Cathy and said that she would know if he was telling the truth. Detective Cady said that Leisha ceased communication with him the next day after realizing that she'd been speaking with a retired police officer and not a grieving family member.
Oh, maybe he should have lied.
A couple years later, on May 9, 2014, retired Detective Cady received another Facebook message, this time from a member of the Tobique First Nation. The message said that there have been a number of stories about Cathy over the decades, but nothing concrete. The sender told Detective Cady that they would be happy to help wherever possible. And this contact was able to share some stories that have been floating around the reservation for years. And one of them goes like this. Quote, "She was brought here by someone and another girl. Some people say they had seen her walking with this man on a dirt road towards the woods. That was the last time they seen her," end quote. Detective Cady received another Facebook message from someone who said that they had overheard their mom's friend Brent tell their mom a story. And the story went that Brent was drinking with Reed Purley and they'd ran out of alcohol. So they walked the New Brunswick Trail to get into town where there was a liquor store. And on their way back, they stopped at a spot along the trail that was on land allegedly owned by Reed's uncle. Who's Reed's uncle?
Oh,
Ivan.
Yes.
Reed then pointed to an area not far from where they were sitting and said that was where he had buried her.
Oh.
Unfortunately, Brent was unable to be contacted as he'd passed away. However, the witness sharing Brent's story seemed reliable, and again, here was more independent information that seemed to line up with what everybody's gut was already telling them.
Sure.
In 2015, Cady received another Facebook message from a person he called a trusted source, and it read that another known contact remembered seeing Reed Purley dragging a young woman up the road around the time frame it was believed Cathy was killed. The contact did confirm that in the fall of 1971, Purley was seen dragging a crying young female into the woods up the street near her home. Now, it was really dark, but this witness was certain the man he saw was Reed. And the identity of the girl was unknown, but it's now believed to have been Cathy based on photographs and descriptions. The witness continued to tell Detective Cady that a few years later, a family whose house was located close to where the crying girl had been dragged into the woods began experiencing paranormal incidents. The children had seen an apparition of a young white girl coming to them at night. And the sightings of this ghostly woman continued to occur frequently for many years. Now, the family had told this contact that just after those incidents, their dog had brought home a human skull.
Whoa.
It was described as not the skull of a child, but not quite the size of an adult. The neighbor assumed it was a skull from the reservation from long ago because they utilized, different types of burial processes than we use in cemeteries now.
Yeah, but also, you don't let anybody know, by the way, there's a skull here.
No, they threw the skull into the communal dump, which has since been capped, and the Tobique band...
What? Guys, if you find a skull, even if it's ancient, you should probably just make sure it goes back where it came from.
I agree with you.
Best case scenario, it was one of their relatives, one of their ancestors, and they're just dump it is.
Into the dump it went. And that dump has since been capped. And now the Tobique Band Office and RCMP police station stand on that location. So how ironic is that if that is where Cathy is resting?
Oh, that's horrible. Well, somebody's head is resting under
Somebody's there, yeah. After hearing this story from his contact, Detective Cady was told there were many others on the reservation who could confirm this story. And again, these messages from independent witnesses just continue to confirm what Detectives Cady and Joyce told the Moulton family back in the summer of 1999. That they believed that Cathy, who was only 16 years old, had met a very bad man and met her demise back in 1971 on the Tobique Point Reservation in New Brunswick.
Ivan.
Cathy's mother, Claire Moulton, said that their house had a sun parlor on the front. And every day after Cathy disappeared, she used to go out in the parlor and look up and down the street, expecting Cathy to show up. She kept doing it up until 2011, when they finally moved out of Cathy's childhood home. The Moultons kept a photo of Cathy on their nightstand and said that it would remain there as long as they are alive. Roy Moulton was quoted as saying, "My greatest, greatest, greatest sadness is that I may die and never know what happened to Cathy, and yet I am helpless to change it." End quote. It breaks my heart to tell you that Roy Moulton did die in 2017 at the age of 92, never knowing for sure what happened to his daughter. And as of September 2021, which was the most recent report I could find on Claire, she was still alive in her early 90s and a great-grandmother.
So my faith does tell me that all things are answered in death or just become irrelevant. I take comfort in knowing that Roy either knows what happened to her and is reunited with her, or just is reunited with her, and again, it's irrelevant. So,
Right.
What a tragic case. And it's just a sequence of people being terrible to Cathy. Any one of them could have turned that around for her. And the fact that she was just treated like chattel, like an object. You just pick her up here, put her there. Nobody's looking out for her. And Lester, all of a sudden growing I'm not even going to call it a conscience.
Right. I know. Me too.
I mean, I can't believe that he even cared to go back after 2 years.
Right.
Unbelievable.
I have so many questions, like, why didn't she call her parents? And maybe she wasn't able to. I do know that she was afraid that they were going to be mad, especially when she didn't come home that night. She was worried she'd get in some kind of trouble, which I get, but
why didn't she say something to, like, Millie and Millie's father? That's the one that I'm like, I feel like if anybody in the story could have been a helper, like, it would have been them.
Right. And the thing is, Millie's father, Joe, he was bringing her a meal so were they asking and not getting the truth? Potentially.
Or did they not want to interfere?
Did they not want to interfere?
I mean, I'm sure in the nature of their business, they had a lot of transient teens. I'm sure.
Sure. Did they?
But it just seems like Cathy doesn't fit that description. Like, she's not, she, again, constantly asking to go home.
Right.
If you hear somebody saying, can't we go home? Can't you go home? You're going to ask a follow-up question, right?
I would. I do, and maybe I'm wrong for this, but I do chalk a lot of it up to the fact that it was 1971, and I do think that was a different time. And I don't even know how, because I wasn't even alive in 1971, but I do feel like maybe we weren't as aware, and maybe it was more of like a mind your own business kind of thing. And I think maybe everything that happened in this case kind of was like you said, it's workers who have more of like a transient lifestyle. It's a reservation where the way investigations are done is handled very differently. It's just all of the things. So many places throughout, I think, well, if this one little thing had gone differently, if Sarah had stopped and said, hey, Cathy, what are you doing? If the police, all of the local police had been made aware that there was a 16-year-old girl missing. If Cathy had just not gotten the car with this guy, all the things. If the guy at the service station had said, I think this girl might be getting kidnapped and trafficked.
I mean, it's a sequence of events, each one getting worse than the last.
Right. And ultimately, again, it's an unsolved mystery. We don't really know. Ultimately, I do believe that between Ivan and Reed, she was probably attacked.
And Reed was the
assaulted.
one that flirted with the doppelganger.
Yes. And then
so he had a type. And
probably
she was his
killed
type.
her.
Yeah.
Yes. And is in prison for rape. And then Ivan, his uncle, is Ivan the rapist, who Cathy was allegedly seen running from his house naked in the middle of a blizzard.
Yeah.
And then she was not seen after that. So I think between the two of them, they mistreated her.
Yeah.
Potentially, attacked her.
Yeah. Assaulted her.
And then
ended her, took her life.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, kudos. I know you've given them a lot of props throughout the episode, but kudos to Detective Joyce and Detective Cady. Incredible work.
They've literally devoted their careers to this case and their lives, because even after retirement, they were both still kind of working on this case. And Detective Cady hoped that this book being released would bring about new leads. So, I'm still hopeful that this case we can get definitive answers. But yeah, amazing. And I think that's why I was so blown away in the beginning when Detective Joyce was like,
yeah, say it again. Say the line.
So he said, that's all we got. It's up to us now. Detectives investigate. So investigate, detective.
Yeah. What else is there to say?
And those two together, working together.
They did it.
Specifically, Detective Cady, doing a lot of the legwork, took nothing. He took a 4-page file and
yeah,
came up with all of this. And I will say the supplement, remember there was a supplement in that file? It actually wasn't even very helpful because in 1988, which was the date of that supplement, a body had been found of a female. And at first they thought maybe this is Cathy, and it wasn't. So literally of the 4 pages of that file, yeah. So yeah. And 25 years later, he came up with what I feel like is a pretty good idea of what could have happened.
Yeah, it's a pretty good approximation for sure.
So there you go.
Well, man, my heart goes out to them.
Yeah, so tell us about the Branch of Hope. Please, pick me up. Pick me up. Because I've been on a whirlwind.
Well, we're sponsoring Q Center for Missing Persons that was covered in last week's case on Ebony Spears, and they were instrumental in looking for Ebony. Of course, Ebony is still missing. Please go listen to her case. That is one that we really felt could be solved at this point, and we really hope that it is, as well as this one. For Detective Cady, what a day that will be when this is solved for him, right?
And I will tell you, like, as much as that was, as much information as that was, I really edited a lot because there are so many people, like so many hands in this. In fact, my husband's associate, one of my husband's associates in the law enforcement agency that he works for, his own father was involved in this case.
Crazy.
All the way up in Portland, Oregon, and here we are in Florida. So there was so much. This case is a lot. You should read the book. If you are interested in this case, please read the book. But yes, to answer Stephanie's question, to go back to that, there are so many people who will be relieved of such a heaviness if we can get this case solved.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this Q Center for Missing Persons was originally founded in Wilmington, North Carolina, but they search for missing persons nationwide now. So we are thrilled to be able to sponsor them. So again, any proceeds that we received in the month of September, so that's either from our Patreon, that's from our sponsors, that's from any additional donations. Of course, if you send any money our way and earmark it for Q, we will send it directly to them. But a portion of everything goes to this amazing 501c3 nonprofit organization. And we hope that it will help fund some of their searches. I almost want to read the oath again.
Oh, I love that. It was beautiful.
So Q is made up completely of volunteers. And before you start on a search, you have to participate in the Q oath, which as follows. I offer myself to those who have nowhere else to turn. These desperate people who ask for my help have unique situations. Yet, however unique, they are bonded together with the commonality of being the loved one of a missing person.
You know, I said I wasn't going to cry, and here I am tearing up.
We've read it on 2 episodes now, but it applies to Cathy's case too. These people that love her, and I would even go out on a limb and say Detective Cady probably feels, compassion and, warmth towards Cathy. That, he feels like he knows her.
Oh, I'm sure.
And definitely knows her family.
Yes.
So join us this month in celebrating this amazing organization, spreading awareness about this organization, and helping fund this organization. If you love this episode, love us, or love what we're doing over at the Branch of Hope Foundation, please share this episode. Please like and subscribe and send us a message on social media. You can reach us on email at thedarkoatpodcast@gmail.com. And definitely join us next week where I give you a crazy roller coaster of a case. It's a 1940s case, but it's got all the Hollywood glamour, which I know Cynthia's going to love. But it's an unsolved mystery of David Bacon. And David Bacon was a pretty up-and-coming Hollywood star. But David Bacon worked with names like Howard Hughes, worked with names like Henry Fonda, Jane Fonda's father. So anyway, a lot of name dropping, but the craziest, wildest, twistiest, turniest case. And I can't wait to share it. So definitely come back next week.
I'll be here.
Well, I know you will. Hopefully we have a few listeners, a few shiver-seeking listeners out there too.
I think we will.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for bearing with us on this wild, kind kind of cold case. Almost solved cold case. How about that? Close to being solved cold case.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Okay, thanks for listening, Shiver Seekers. You guys rock.
Bye.
Bye.
This episode of The Dark Oak was created, researched, written, recorded, hosted, edited, published, and marketed by Cynthia and Stephanie of Just Us Gals Productions, and made possible by you, our shiver-seeking listener. Special thanks goes to Justice Himes for our incredible artwork and Ryan Crete for our amazing music.